This is slide 1 in our next unit, Progressivism. Now, to understand a little bit about what progressive is and why it's so important, you got to understand something about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is sometimes called the Gilded Age. The Industrial Revolution into this time. Gilded, G-I-L-D-E-D, Gilded Age. And something that is gilded is covered in gold. It's gold-plated. But what you don't understand, though, about what's covered in gold is that under that shiny gold outer exterior that you see is basically a worthless hunk of lead. So it's something that looks great and wonderful and beautiful on the outside, but underneath, it's worthless. Okay? The Gilded Age refers to the Industrial Revolution, because to the rest of the world, and to most Americans even, the Industrial Revolution looked great and wonderful. We had all these new inventions. We were producing record amounts of goods. We were outproducing the rest of the world combined. To the rest of the world, the United States looked like the perfect country here. Okay, look at all these great, wonderful things we're producing. But what you don't see is all the corruption going on underneath that shiny exterior. You don't see the child labor. You don't see the dangerous working conditions. You don't see the low pay. You don't see the poverty. You don't see the slums. You don't see all the things underneath unless you're in the middle of all that. Right? So the Industrial Revolution was referred to as the Gilded Age. And the Progressivism movement, right, they're trying to progress society. The Progressivism movement sets out to fix all of the problems of the Industrial Revolution, all those things I just mentioned. So that kind of sets the stage for this unit. So let's get started here. Where else? In the beginning. Okay. And let's look at, first of all, who were the progressive reformers? Reform is change, so a reformer is somebody who wants to change something. The progressive reformers, okay, really can be summed up in 4 different descriptions. Not every progressive reformer meets all 4 of these, but they'll meet most of them. Right? Number 1, first of all, progressive reformers are typically middle to upper class citizens. Middle to upper class. Right? Now, these are people trying to help the lower class. So, why would the lower class not get involved in all of this? Because they don't have time. They're working 10, 12, 14 hours a day in a factory somewhere. They don't have time to attend meetings and work for causes. They just want to work, get their paycheck, go home, eat, sleep, and do it all again the next day. So middle to upper class are the reformers. Number 2, they are native born, meaning they are born here in the United States. So they're not immigrants. Okay? Now again, they're working for immigrants, but immigrants don't have time. They're the ones in the factories. So native born. 3, they're typically college educated. Middle to upper class, most of them have a college education. And they take what they learn at college and they apply it to fixing these social problems. Okay? And number 4, typically a progressive reformer is female. Most often they're female because men were the ones working. Some middle-class women worked because they wanted to, not because they had to. Upper-class women never worked. So women had more time to devote to social causes. And typically that's still the case today. Not always, but typically. So a typical progressive reformer, middle to upper class, native-born, college-educated, and female. Right? Now, the motto of the progressive reformers is strengthen the state. And by state, they mean the government. state government or federal government or local, either any of them, but strengthen the state, giving power to the government. Because who has the power at this time? Big business does. Who do courts always side with? Big business. Who does the government always side with? Big business, right? So we've got to get power to the government, because the government is supposed to be representing the people. And if the government doesn't represent the people can vote those congressmen, those governors, they can vote them out, right? So somebody has to take care of the people, and it's going to have to be the government. So strengthen the state becomes the motto. Right? Now, one particular brand of progressivism was known as the social gospel. Right? And this was a progressivism that was based on Christian teachings. They referred to the Bible. They looked to the Bible for their guidance. They look at the example of Christ in the Gospels, where he says, take care of the poor, take care of those who can't take care of themselves. So progressives see themselves as carrying out the work of Christ through the social gospel. Right? Many progressive reformers were also feminists. Women who worked for women's rights. Well, they added social justice to their list of causes here. Two in particular that were very powerful, very popular leaders. One of them, Jane Addams, in Chicago, okay, and Lillian Wald in New York. These are two progressive reformers. There's Addams, there's Wald, who are also feminists. They had been working for women's rights. When progressivism gets going and picks up steam, they add those causes to their list of needed reforms or changes. Okay? Now, progressivism could not have succeeded without the work of the Muckrakers. Right? Muckrakers. Okay? Muck is a term for garbage, mud, filth, just disgusting stuff. Okay, a bunch of muck. All right. Muckraker is somebody who stirs all that up. Okay. The definition of a muckraker, right, is an investigative journalist. An investigative journalist. Right? Now, an investigative journalist is different from just an average journalist. Okay, a journalist will interview people and then write a newspaper article or a magazine article about it. An investigative journalist doesn't just talk to people; they do, but people can lie to you. So, an investigative journalist will go experience it themselves and then write articles about it. So, for instance, if a muckraker is writing an article about the horrible living conditions in slums, they will go live in the slums and write their personal experience. If they're writing an article about the dangerous conditions in the factories, workplace conditions, they'll go get a job and work in the factories and then write an article about it. So they experience things themselves. Okay? Now, one of the problems with muckrakers, and they're very necessary, we need them here. One of the problems with them is they expose the problem, but they never propose any solutions to it. They don't see that as their job. Muckrakers see their job as raising awareness of a problem. Because unless you live in the slums, you don't know how bad it is. Unless you work in the factories, you don't know how bad it is. Muckrakers see their job as raising awareness of a problem, not proposing a solution to it. That's somebody else's job. Right? But here you see up at the top of the page there, the political cartoon. This is Teddy Roosevelt, Mr. Rapp's favorite president, and we'll talk a lot about Teddy Roosevelt in this unit. There you see Teddy in the White House, because it says right there, the title, The Muckrake and Some of the Muck. Right? Roosevelt raking the senatorial muck heap, all the corruption, the filth in the Senate. There he is raking up the bad senators. Right? So muckrakers are very necessary. They expose the problem. They raise awareness of a problem. But they don't actually help solve the problem. Okay? So anyway, let's talk about some of these muckrakers here. And the first thing here we just said, their primary job is to raise awareness of a problem, to make people aware that there is a problem. Because you can't solve a problem if you don't know there is one. And a lot of people didn't know there were problems. We're back to the gilded part of the Gilded Age here. They just saw the great and wonderful things, excuse me, of the Industrial Revolution. They didn't know what was going on kind of behind the scenes. All right? So muckrakers raise awareness. Three of them in particular you're going to need to know about here. The first one is a woman named Ida Tarbell. Ida Tarbell. She goes after John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, determined to bring down Rockefeller for his monopoly on the oil industry. Now, it's not just that, she doesn't want to pay the high price of oil. She doesn't, I doubt uses a lot of oil individually, but her problem with Rockefeller is that her father owned one of those small oil companies that Roosevelt, I'm looking at the picture here, that Rockefeller ran out of business and took over and added to his trust. So she's looking to avenge her father here. It's personal for her. The next one is a man named David Phillips, who writes a series of articles, actually writes a book here called The Treason of the Senate. The Treason of the Senate. Okay? And in The Treason of the Senate, Phillips claims that 75 of the 90 senators, we only had 90 at that time, we still don't have all 50 states yet, but 75 of the 90 senators did not represent the people. Okay? They represented big business. They made decisions what was best for the companies that donated a lot of money to them. They did not make decisions based on what was best for the people of their state. So they're treasonous. They're betraying the people of their state. The treason of the Senate. The third one is a man named Upton Sinclair, who writes a novel called The Jungle. And The Jungle is one of the most influential novels during this time, really I think in U.S. history, not world certainly, but in U.S. history, it's an incredibly important novel. The Jungle tells the stories of Chicago's meatpacking houses, the slaughterhouses. There you see the novel cover there and the cow carcass being split open. It tells the story of the meatpacking houses and the horrible, dirty, filthy, disgusting conditions in the meatpacking houses. It's the story of an immigrant family who comes to America. They end up in Chicago working in these houses, and how the people are abused and taken advantage of. Sinclair, and if you'll remind me in class, somebody remind me, I'll tell you some disgusting stories from The Jungle. And remember, this is a muckraker. Sinclair is a muckraker, so he went and worked in the meatpacking houses before he wrote this novel. But anyway, Sinclair doesn't write the novel specifically to point out how disgusting the meat is and how disgusting the slaughterhouses are. The Jungle was originally written as a socialist novel. Okay? Socialist propaganda, that capitalism, our system of economy here in the U.S., that capitalism has failed the average worker. Average workers are being taken advantage of, so the rich can get richer. He was trying to point out that capitalism had failed and that people needed to take over, and that the government needed to take over the means of production. Right? That's the basic message of socialism, that all are equal here, right? There's a famous quote by Sinclair after The Jungle is a hit. He says, I aimed for the country's heart, but instead hit it in the stomach. Because people read the book, and instead of feeling bad for the poor workers in the factories and the slaughterhouses that are being taken advantage of, all they got out of the jungle was, oh my God, this meat is so disgusting. What am I eating? It's horrible. We got to clean this up. Blah blah blah, and all that. They miss the big message here that people are being taken advantage of by big business. Now, that doesn't mean the jungle is a failure. It's a huge success because a couple of good things do come out of the jungle. Two new government acts. One, called the Meat Inspection Act, that allows federal government inspectors to go into these slaughterhouses. And if things are really as bad as they say, the slaughterhouses can be shut down by the federal government. So all meat will be inspected. Okay? And another one called the Pure Food and Drug Act. This act requires that all ingredients be listed. So whatever these companies are putting into your meat or your vegetables or your medicine, whatever, has to be listed. They have to tell you exactly what's going into it. Okay? Both of these come as a result of Teddy Roosevelt. President Roosevelt reads The Jungle and is disgusted by it and says we have to do something to clean up these conditions. Nothing about socialism, but we have to clean up the meat packing houses. Okay? Now, the targets of the muckrakers, what do they go after? Well, a lot of the stuff we've talked about. Right? Unsafe working conditions in the factories and the meat packing houses. So accidents, industrial accidents in the factories. They go after slums and poverty in the inner city. They go after prostitution and sex slave traffic. They go after racism, anti-immigrant feelings. All these things are targets of the progressives, and specifically the muckrakers. Okay? And lastly, what is the cure for the cure for the muckrakers? Well, it's basically that more democracy. We need to get people more power. And the way you get more democracy is getting people involved in government. We need to get people more involved in government. And we need to get government more involved in the lives of the people. Okay? Big business is calling the shots and running everything. We've got to stop that and get power back into the hands of the people. And the way you do that is to get it into the hands of the government. So more democracy is the cure.